I want to tell you that the first thing I did was to throw out my planned speech. I was stunned by the news that after 35 years, the number of the top colleges in the United States had not increased the number of black students in their schools. This is in spite of the fact that 29% more black students are going to college. I think this is rather shocking. To go back to the times when I was a dean, I can remember many things. The first thing is, the question I've been asked most frequently is, how did you become a dean? This was 1968. It was before the Equal Opportunities Act has been passed. My simple answer was, I picked up a friend of a friend, Antonia Shays, at the airport, in LaGuardia Airport on the way to a party, and she said, I've just been appointed Dean of Jackson College, what are you doing? Before the ride was over, she had asked me to be Assistant Dean at Tufts University. Actually, it was Jackson College, the Women's College of Tufts University. So that's how I became a dean. But going back to my childhood and a little history about myself, I grew up in Hawaii. The Hawaii of my childhood was essentially a segregated society. There were 7 beauty queens, 1 for each race. There was a Chinese Methodist church, a Japanese Methodist church, a Korean Methodist church, and a Methodist church for whites. And also, if you look at the Chamber of Commerce, there was a white Chamber of Commerce or a Chamber of Commerce for whites, 1 for Chinese, another Chamber of Commerce for the Japanese, another Chamber of Commerce for the Chinese, and another Chamber of Commerce for, let's say, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans. So we really were, in fact, a segregated society. Furthermore, I went to the public schools in the neighborhood. In my neighborhood, I looked at my graduation picture in the 6th grade, and I was one of, I was one of 4% Asians in my class at a time when the Asian population in Hawaii was 80% Asian. You can't say it really was not a segregated society. So moving fast forward to 1968, when I had picked up Tony Shays and became a dean, the question I've been most frequently asked was, what was life like as a dean? What was it like to be a dean in the 60s? You remember the 60s when the divorce rates were running high and students didn't want to stay in school. The Vietnam War was on. There were the children of the greatest generation, the children of Martin Luther King's generation, and they were not what you would call placid students. There was also something new had been added to the list of drinks. We now had LSD on campus. We had marijuana to add to alcohol. There was a high demand for co-ed dorms, which Tufts was the first one to have a co-ed dorm, funded by the United States government. But that moves us into another phase. One of the big issues on campus was the construction of a new dorm. The new dorm was along with 2 other projects at Brandeis and Harvard University, brought the students out en masse because they found out that while $30 million was going to be spent on these projects, the United States government contracts in those days did not have a fair employment clause. This is 25 years after World War II. That's a quarter of a century. And the contracts, building contracts in Boston, did not allow minority workers. So the students at Harvard, Brandeis, and Tufts decided to go on a strike. They did. 2 nights before the strike, the Afro Society stopped talking to the administration. It was very quiet on campus. I walked around to all the Jackson dorms and said, we're not sure what's going to happen, but we just want you to be calm and everything will be fine. I got back home, told my children, if I'm not here, I'm okay. I'll be somewhere on campus. And I went to bed with my fully dressed in my suit. That lasted for about 15 minutes. I heard shouts and screams, got a call from the president's house. What's going on? I said, it's a panty raid. It's a what? It's a panty raid. Well, next question was, what are they shouting? They're shouting, we want silk. That went out in World War II. Yes, but they probably learned it from their fathers. The next day, the strike was on. It was a very rainy, wet day. The black students were out. The white students were out to protect the black students. The faculty was out. Al Ullman was out there with some young faculty members. I want to tell you a story about Al Ullman. When Al was in World War II, he headed a landing craft boat. That is one that takes the troops ashore. It was D-Day, and it was his job to get the troops ashore. When he got to shore, a lot of the young guys didn't want to get off the landing craft. And he had to urge them. You know, after all, they looked around, they saw these dead bodies floating, heavy gunfire. He had to go back and get more troops. So the troops had gone ashore. This time, he was going to have a lot of assistance, and he did in the way of other young faculty members. Well, it really rained that day. After a march, the strike was called off, and the result was that these $30 million contracts at Harvard, Brandeis, and Tufts brought to Tufts 2 plumbers and 2 tradesmen. I can't remember what they did. And that was what the gain was. That was what the whole strike was about. Today I'm going to speak a little more about black students in white colleges because of what's currently happening. What was their experience like? For most students in America, I think boarding schools anyway, boarding colleges, their experience with black students as a way of living with them was quite different from maybe going to school with them. Even that was rare in the 60s. For black and white students at Tufts University, and it's the only place I can talk about, the experience varied. Some black and white student roommates got along very well. Others didn't, but they were very polite and they just separated. Others had a pretty rough time. In one case, in one dormitory, the students nobody would live with a white student. She had been so nasty to her roommate, and so we had to move her out of the dorm. And let me tell you some of the things that happened. It was not unusual for a black student to encounter a white student and say, "Can I see your hands? Why are they so white? Why are they black on the other side? Can I touch your hair? How do you comb your hair? How do you work the coin washing machines?" We always had our own at home, assuming that, of course, the black students never had washing machines at home. After 2 years, a group of 12 black students came to see me and said, "Could we have a set of rooms to ourselves?" And I said, "Well, there's the Afro House where you could live." "No, we don't want to live in the Afro House, but we would like a place where we could be together." I said, "You have to ask the housing group." This move of students after the freshman year was decided by a group of upperclassmen. After a 3-hour debate, they did allow these students to move into a section of their own. I did have one black student who finally quit and said, "I'm leaving. I'm tired of being Whitey's play school toy." And she rejoined the Alvin Ailey dance group. I give that as an insight as to what really happens in a university dormitory. Let's see, what other stories have I got to tell you? As we move on at this particular point, I think it's important to see that not having the top universities and colleges in this country, and that I'm talking about the 29 that New York Times identified, not having them increase the number of black students in a third of the century is kind of a disgrace. And I'll end up with a story of Helen Keller. When I was a little girl, actually in the 5th grade, Helen Keller came to Hawaii. My 5th grade teacher pushed me in front of Helen Keller and said, "Here's a little Korean girl." And out came this hand, and these hands, like tentacles, went over my face. And I always wondered, what did she see? What did she feel? How did she know who I was? Helen Keller just smiled at me, and I thought about it a great deal, and then realized one day that it was a matter of having no eyes. Have you no eyes was a phrase that my family used constantly. It was what sociologists or psychologists say, a way of controlling behavior. Have you no eyes? Can't you see the situation? And so the term "have you no eyes" was a very common phrase in my time. Have you no eyes? So I say to the new generations, to the more than the 29 colleges and universities, have you no eyes? Thank you.